Welcome to tonight's online forum to discuss the district's proposed allergy and anaphylaxis management policy. I'm Megan Downs, tonight's moderator. Thank you for joining us from your computers, tablets, smartphones, and other mobile devices. Tonight we'll be giving you a brief presentation of the proposed policy, and then we'll open up our discussion to questions and comments from our live virtual audience. If you'd like to submit a question or comment, you can email questions@washoschools.net, and that should be scrolling on our video now. This, of course, is a very popular topic in our community, and we've already received more than 200 questions and feedback from community members. We will do our best to get to as many questions and comments as possible in the hour that we have allotted tonight. But tonight we will give priority to our live viewers and weave in some of the earlier emailed questions as frequently as possible. It's important to remember that this policy has not been finalized nor been voted on by the Board of Trustees. We are seeking community feedback to better inform this draft policy. Please be assured that all of your feedback, whether sent before, after, or during the forum, will be shared with our policy creators as well as the Board of Trustees. I'd like to now introduce Victor Sherbondy, who is the Executive Director of our Strategies Office, and he's going to give you more details on this policy.
Thank you, Megan. Just wanted to welcome the 375 participants that are online this evening and thank them for logging in and joining us. We're really hopeful that we're going to be able to have a great conversation tonight around this very controversial and complex policy. I wanted to introduce the panel this evening. I'm joined by a number of content experts, and we have Margaret Allen, who is our Director of Health Services, to my right. Also, Tammy Golden Bosco, who is a counselor but oversees compliance for Section 504. And we have Rose Walterbeek, who is from our Food and Nutrition Services Department. And so Rose is here. Vicki Cooper is one of our school nurses. And so that's who we're joined by tonight, and they will field a variety of questions as they come in, depending on their specific expertise in those content areas. I wanted to thank our communications department for putting this online forum together this evening. This is a great opportunity for us to get feedback from another important stakeholder group. And so we've been going on the road, so to speak, getting feedback from a variety of stakeholder groups. And we intend to do that all the way up until we go back to the board on March the 3rd and present our feedback and our findings to them so that they can make an informed decision on this very complex policy. So we have three objectives tonight that we really are hoping to talk a little bit about. We want to dispel some rumors and misinformation that we have seen in some of the online posts. And also, a lot of the misinformation or rumors are similar to when we're going to the variety of stakeholder groups. We're hearing similar things. We also had a lot of great comments, and so we wanted to talk about those as well. We wanted to have some suggestions from you this evening on the language that we have in Board Policy 5630. So if you have specific ideas of certain clauses or language, we would love to hear that. And one of the big questions is, should this be a policy only for the elementary level or all levels, middle and high school as well? And so we're hopeful that we'll hear your opinions and ideas around that as well. As I've mentioned, this is a very controversial, very complex, lots of layers in this policy. There's also a lot of emotion around this one, and on both sides. And it seems like the further that we dig, the more convoluted it seems to get, because there's a lot of what-if questions and a lot of different scenarios. Margaret and I, along with a few others, presented to the board back on November 5th, the original policy, and they directed us to go back and get a bunch of stakeholder feedback, which is exactly what we're doing, so that when we go back to the board, we can provide them with that and they can make a better, more informed decision. There's a clear distinction as we've been taking this conversation on the road between saying no food in the classroom or no sharing of food in the classroom. So we're going to talk a little bit about that tonight. And we know that in many of our classrooms around the district that food is required in the classroom. It's required in a variety of our Title I schools. Kids have to eat breakfast. It's also required or embedded in a lot of our curriculum. And so we know that as well. And so the policy will speak to that. We talk a little bit about prepackaged food versus food that's brought in without any labels or anything. We talk primary learning environment, where all students are required to be. We talk about a little bit about as well about kind of some essential questions that have arisen out of our conversations. And one of those essential questions is, we've been celebrating parties, particularly at the elementary level, for 60 or 70 years in this district, with a lot of food and celebration in that way. And one of the essential questions is, are we prepared, are we ready as a district to go in a different direction and celebrate differently in the classroom? And that will be determined by the board. And I think we're also going to talk a little bit about exemption days and how that plays in. We'll talk about maybe some bullying or SEL components to this as well. And I think that's all I have at this point. So we're going to open it up at this point to questions, and our panel will answer them to the best of our ability. And we just thank you for participating in this forum this evening.
Thanks, Victor. So I'll start with some of the online ones we're receiving right now. We have a question here about, if I want my child to celebrate a holiday, under this draft policy, can I pack a treat for them to eat at lunch?
Yeah.
This is Margaret Allen. I'll take that question. What we're proposing in this policy is that there is just no shared food in the classroom. As the director of school nursing, I was on the fence with this subject until this summer when I started doing a lot of research, and hearing my nurses struggle with the numerous parties that occur at some schools and the issues they were having, I came to the realization, number one, I looked at anything that was food related. We have food allergies. The statistics on food allergies is that 2 kids in every classroom have a food allergy. We have EpiPens that we provide in the school and to treat an anaphylactic reaction. But we also have diabetic students. We have a large problem with obesity. And we just feel that the sharing of food is not healthy for anybody. If parents want their children to have snacks or to have party food, our recommendation is they bring that food in, and it is not to be shared.
Thank you. Another question we've received is, why this policy now? Is there something about timing, or what is it that you've seen that had made this urgent or on your plates now?
I think maybe Vicki and I could talk to that together. Vicki struggled a lot in one of her schools in trying to keep kids safe. And I'll let you share a little bit about what you did and the information you sent to us in evaluating what other school districts were doing.
Yeah, I've been a school nurse close to 20 years. And I've just seen more and more food allergies, also increase in diabetes, and of course with obesity, we're seeing a lot of that. And so it just became more and more apparent as more children had allergies and these other problems that it was getting harder and harder to manage for parties, looking through all the ingredients, food that came from homes. How did we know for sure that it was safe? And it just got to the point where there were so many of these issues that I didn't feel like I could keep these kids safe. So every time there was a party or every time there was food that was shared, it was just too hard to keep track of all that and to keep the kids safe. So, and then we'd also have children that had unknown allergies also, and we do have the stock EpiPens. But if we have, a large number of children at one party, what do we do? That was an issue too. So it just became apparent that this policy will keep all children safe, and that was my feeling.
I would also, Victor Sherbondy, I would also add that statistically we know that food allergies are on the rise nationally. We do know that there are some school districts across the country that have adopted a similar policy. And really, I think what this policy is trying to accomplish is minimizing risk. So, yeah.
One of the things that started some of my research was Vicki contacted a nurse in, I believe, Illinois. And that school district, after an unfortunate event where a child died, adopted a policy of no shared food throughout the district. The nurse did share with Vicki that it took them a long time to get there. It was a big cultural change for them. And again, for me, the statistics were really astonishing. 46% of the kids that have allergies will, have them in the classroom. But again, like Victor said, a lot of kids don't have allergies. Our EpiPens, we have undesignated EpiPens for available in every school. That's the same throughout the United States. And it is strictly because of the high incidence of food allergies that we have these. Most of the EpiPens that are used in our district are used on students that do not know they have an allergy.
Another question we've received is, could you explain why currently some schools are already implementing this policy and how that works?
I will take that. I have some mean nurses in some schools. I think that sometimes the nurses have really stressed the fact that we want to keep kids safe, and principals have actually said it's just too hard to control. They don't want to discriminate against a child in one classroom and then other classrooms are celebrating. And one principal told his school nurse that the first day of school was such a disaster in trying to vet all the food that was coming in that he just said, I'm not doing this. We're just going to have a no shared food. We don't want to bring outside food in. And so some schools have, again, adopted it at the recommendation of the school nurse. Others have chosen to wait until there's a policy.
And I don't know if Rose or if Tammy want to comment on this, but I do know that the complexities of this policy center around impacting other policies as well. For example, our wellness policy will be altered slightly if this policy becomes a policy, this proposal, as well as Section 504. So,
thank you, Victor. As far as Section 504 is concerned for our students, it is an assurance or that we are taking the safety of all children, those with disabilities, impairments, or health conditions that substantially limit major life activities seriously in their learning forum in the classroom, and therefore some accommodations that are within the policy are already in place under a student's Section 504 to help ensure that allergens that could compromise that student's health and well-being within their zone school classroom are being considered, and everybody has equal access to a safe learning environment.
Yeah, and this is Rose Walterbeek, and speaking specifically to the student wellness policy, we do have under that exception days, as was mentioned earlier, and that would be, they currently are at not to exceed twice per month. And really in the spirit of the wellness policy, it's looking at that special occasion, looking at holidays, birthdays, etc., and also the learning class environment. And in that specific policy, we are looking and we have recommended that they be commercially prepared, again, to minimize that risk of the foodborne illness as well as to avoid those known food allergens. So that would be something that would be addressed with the stakeholder group. There's also some other options in there on some non-food ideas for celebrations and information, both from a food safety and an allergen standpoint that is already a common thread that is in that student wellness policy. Thank you.
One we just received from our live audience, wondering what the number of bullying incidents of students bullied for having food allergies is in the last 5 years, or if you could speak to, any data you might have on bullying incidents.
This is Margaret Allen. I don't have the exact percentage of children that are bullied, but from the research that's been done, there is a high number of students who are bullied. What we do know is children feel excluded when there's a birthday party where they're a diabetic and cupcakes are brought in, or they're a child who has some other food disorder or an allergy. They do feel excluded, and there seems to be a high incidence of bullying that occurs with food allergies.
I would collaborate exactly with what Margaret just mentioned, that any student who has an accommodation, we try to deal with that as sensitively as possible in a classroom to protect the child's privacy as well as the culture and community in the classroom. When food is involved, it does bring another level of concern for the student with an allergy, and that is something that other students without the allergy do not need to consider necessarily. Therefore, making every student feel included and welcome and safe in a classroom is important to us, and hopefully the framework of this policy will help ensure that all students have equal access.
Another comment we just received. My 3-year-old is in preschool, has multiple food allergies, and a prescription EpiPen. In the case of an exposure event, who will make the determination that he needs that EpiPen and at what point?
So as a nurse, when we find out about an allergy such as this, we make up a healthcare plan, and it is given to the main teacher and all the teachers or staff that come into contact with the child, and also the clinical aide that's at the school is trained. We have a Code Blue team that's trained. We have the secretary, clerk, everybody in the office, they're all trained on EpiPens. We train 3 times a year, and we go over the health care plan of that child with everyone there at the school.
The other part to that is that 911 is usually called, and the parent will decide whether that child is taken to the emergency room or not. We do know from research that once every 3 minutes somebody goes to the emergency room with some type of an allergic reaction. So it is a very costly issue as well.
Another question we seem to be getting often is, and you touched on this a little bit, but what percentage of our 64,000 students have life-threatening allergic reactions in our schools?
This is Margaret. We presented that information to the board when we initially did this. We don't have numbers on the percentages in our school district that are real firm numbers, because when we pulled data, it gave us students with any type of a food-related disorder, so included in that would be diabetics, and it was close to, I believe, about 3,000 students. That would not include, just the food allergy. We do know that, again, we give epinephrine mostly to kids that do not know they have food allergies but are having an allergic reaction.
And just a reminder to the live audience, we are getting lots of questions right now, so we're trying to get to all of them, but please be patient with us as we get through it all. The next one is, please explain how you have involved teachers and families of children without allergies in this process. Many are feeling that they are being punished by your proposal.
This is Margaret. I'll take that question. It's really a matter of safety, and so again, epinephrine was mandated to be available in all schools because of the increase in the number of students with food allergies. In the past, the nurses have done a great job of educating parents, teachers, and others in the classroom. We've had allergy aware tables. They've sent letters out. And in this situation, what happened was we were having such a hard time from the nursing perspective, protecting these children, that we just started to say, what are we going to do? We have a problem that could potentially lead to the death of a child. We need to be proactive, and so we have started instituting the policy, not a policy, but instituting the emergency action plan that Vicki spoke of. For those students that have anaphylaxis, that in that classroom they cannot have shared food.
Yeah.
And I stress to parents that do have children without food allergies. You know, we're not trying to punish anybody. It's just a shift in what we're doing. So we want to focus on the fun, not the food. And that's what I keep saying. There's other things we can use in celebrations that are non-food items. The kids, from what I've found, we've been implementing this at some of the schools where I have a high amount of kids with allergies. The kids just don't seem to miss it. It seems more of a parent thing. It's very strange, but the kids have fun, and they have non-food items that they do. They still have goodie bags, but they're filled with things that are not food. And in my experience, I've just noticed it's just a shift. It's a different way of thinking, but it keeps everybody safe. It levels the playing field. The kids that have allergies, they don't feel ostracized. They're part of it, and it just really works for everybody.
I would also quickly add that we've heard this a number of times in our variety of conversations, and I think that if this policy does go forward, we're going to have to do a good job of educating our teachers or helping them prepare for this shift so that they have the tools or the resources that they need to celebrate parties differently, because it is a shift. It is different.
You may want to elaborate on that a little bit more, with the next question we have is related. So if this policy is put in place, how will it be enforced? My daughter has a peanut and tree nut allergy, and some of her teachers are very good about keeping homemade food out of the classroom, but others have allowed it, which puts her in danger.
I think any policy is going to be difficult to fully enforce. I think the education piece will be critical or key in this, because I think that if teachers and administrators realize that there are other ways to celebrate, and it doesn't prevent we're not reducing the amount of fun or the experience, it's just being done in a different way. But to actually have teeth in this policy and consequences if a teacher were to violate it, I think that would be very hard to implement.
Also, we do have information from the CDC that recommends that there's no sharing of food. Again, like Victor says, I think it's hard for the nurses to police. They can't be at every party. They don't know when food's being brought in. So the awareness we're creating, even though it's been very controversial, has been really exciting for me, because I feel that we're starting to educate people about food allergies and how serious and unpredictable an anaphylactic reaction could be.
Another question from our live audience. Who keeps track of student allergies? Is it the responsibility of a nurse, of a teacher, or how does that work?
When students are enrolled in school, the nurses get a health questionnaire, and sometimes we don't know a student has allergies, but we depend on the parents to tell us. And again, depending on the situation, they may have a 504, they may not, but we still, if we know about it, we still put a plan in place like we would do with any health condition to protect that child.
Do you want to explain a little bit more about a 504 for those who may not be aware of what that is?
Section 504 is legislation that comes from the Rehabilitation Act of 1973 to help ensure two fundamental aspects. Number one, that students or individuals have equal access. In this case, we're speaking about students. They have equal access to the learning environment, the same as non-disabled peers. Students qualify for safeguards under Section 504 if they have a disability, impairment, or another health condition, which could be mental, physical, emotional, social, that substantially limits any of the Congress listed major life activities. And after being determined eligible by a Section 504 team of knowledgeable individuals at the school site, then the discussion begins over appropriate student data, which can include attendance, doctor's reports, pretty much anything that speaks to the condition itself and how the condition or symptoms are posing as barriers to students accessing their education. These barriers can also result in discrimination sometimes, and we want to help ensure that students with a disability, impairment, or health condition are allowed equal access regardless of their condition. That said, then comes the discussion about what accommodations would look like. In terms of an allergy, it is very dependent upon the student. It's dependent upon the environment, what resources or in other learning environments are relevant to the school, as well as, probably one of the most important considerations are the age and self-advocacy of some students. Some students, will say, I absolutely cannot have that. Other students want to be quiet about it and kind of internalize, and then sometimes get a little bit emotional over that too. Accommodations already in place may differ from one student with a peanut allergy to another student with a different kind of allergy. So they are tailored specifically to the student and their specific needs or symptoms. And their grade and level in school has a lot to do with that as well. Ultimately, the goal is to help ensure that the classroom environment is equally as safe for the student with an allergy as students with non-allergies, and what can be done to minimize the risk to that student's health. So, for example, letters to parents who are in the classroom that there's a student who has an allergy, and if they were to send a snack with their student, please have it be prepackaged with a label on it and free of nuts. And along with that letter would accompany a list of food items for parents of kiddos who have no allergies, what some of the acceptable foods would look like and what they can purchase for their kiddos. So,
Megan, I would just like to add quickly that we've talked about healthcare plans, we've talked about 504s. You brought up earlier a question about why now. I would just add that I feel that as a district for a long period of time, we've done a good job of protecting students that have food allergies the best we can. And we've done that through healthcare plans, as we've talked about. Tammy might know better than I do, but I think it's fairly common that if a student has a healthcare plan for a food allergy, they also have a 504. And so we're not changing that. That will continue. I think this policy would be above and beyond anything we've done previously.
And sorry, one more thing to add to that. I believe the question asked the number of students or percentage of students within our population of allergies. We have a spreadsheet with documented students with a brief description of what the qualifying condition is for the student, and we have that for all of our students on 504s. We have allergy as one of the brief descriptions. So peanut allergies are increasingly prominent in our school district. There are two things that would cause me to consider, naming an exact number, simply because it is possible for students who are wonderful advocates for themselves and are confident in standing up for their own accommodations, may refuse Section 504. Again, as our nurse and Margaret have mentioned that it is the unknown that also wouldn't be qualified in that. So 504s would be one way of identifying allergies, but I would say that would be an underestimate of what is in reality out there.
Thank you. Another recent question we just received. How many school districts nationwide have adopted such a policy that many might consider stringent or extreme?
I have some information on just a couple. I know the state of Illinois has done this. Massachusetts has done it. And I believe that they have done it across the district. Mm-hmm. So, and again, from everything I could see, it was done after an unfortunate occurrence.
Megan, I don't know the exact number. I do know it's not very many when you think of the thousands of school districts in this country. So in that sense, I think that if our board and our district decide to go forward with this, it would be kind of cutting edge to a certain extent.
Mm-hmm. Great. A comment we just received. Why don't we establish a learning opportunity to our students regarding allergies to prevent bullying and educate our students about food, animals, etc., thus making the children and kids with these allergies feel able to be more open and less excluded, and those with non-allergies can be more understanding?
I think that is the goal when the nurse develops an emergency action plan. We want to make students independent in managing their own health condition, whatever it is. And this is giving us a great opportunity to do some education. Victor and I presented to a group of high school students, and they were just amazing. It was probably one of the best groups that we presented to. And each one of them raised their hands. They knew kids that had allergies and, were advocating for themselves. And the feedback they gave us was really good. They challenged us and said, you can't control this in the junior high and high school. So, again, the feedback was really, really good and valuable.
Great. Another recent comment. Prohibiting or limiting food in the classroom is the best way to minimize risk and allows teachers to focus on teaching in addition to reducing the negative impact of students ingesting sugars and dyes. So, comment we received. Let's see. A lot of you have done introductions, but we have our audience coming in and out. So if we could just talk a little bit more about your experience. The question we're being asked is, has this policy, this draft policy, been evaluated by a medical professional?
We haven't had it evaluated by a medical professional locally, but we do have some best practice. And again, the CDC tends to provide information when they see health conditions on the rise. And there is some really good information from the CDC saying we recommend no shared food in the classroom.
Great. Let's see. And another question that we're getting is related to enforcement. And I'd like to bring up our interim superintendent to talk about that we would need to have an administrative policy to help get that ready, and then just kind of what the other steps look like in terms of drafting a policy from the Board of Trustees end. And she'll be right up to the podium.
So good evening, and thank you for the question. Interim Superintendent Kristen McNeil. So just to be clear, to kind of add on to Executive Director Victor Sherbondy, we do have board policy, and board policy is actually enforced through administrative regulations. And so we would also want, if this policy were to go forward, and I just want to kind of clarify that the board policy goes before the board policy committee in March, and there absolutely has all the opportunities for input, just as Margaret and Victor have been going out to several different types of forums such as this to get input. That's another opportunity for the public to provide our Board of Trustees input. This is a very emotional, very important type of topic that we want to make sure that we have all the input that we need. for the board to make the decision. And at that board policy meeting, it is very, happens all the time where the board may suggest an edit or something like that to change the policy, or to edit, to make revisions of that board policy. So I just want to stress that this is a draft and it goes to the board policy. And then there are different types of opportunities where it will then go back out to the public before the board finally makes any type of approval. It goes out for 13 days. Once we have a defined, approved board policy, administrative regulations are then drafted. And that's really where the enforcement will come in as far as what those administrative regulations. But again, we will definitely want input on what those administrative regulations, and that's really the how the board policy is going to be implemented.
Thank you, Dr. McNeil. Another comment we just received, why can't the district have a form like the one for internet use, media use for students with allergies? The parents can then opt out of school parties, or parents can bring their own treat for their own child. These students will always be in these situations, and many classrooms use food not only as a reward but to teach math or science subjects. I think to make a blanket statement for all students is not equitable.
I appreciate that comment because we are hearing that. We hear that from parents of students that have food allergies. Again, we're sending every comment we get supporting this policy, and those that are opposing it with their comments to the board. We want them to be educated in approving or disapproving the policy. Our goal is to keep children who may not be able to advocate for themselves safe.
Next question. How does this plan address equity and diversity concerns? To say that you can have celebrations without food is the perspective of a specific ethnic group. Many ethnic and cultural groups value food as a key part of their identity and essential to any celebration. Why are we denying this expression at the same time the district is focusing on equity and diversity?
I'll take that. I mean, I think it's a tough question, but it's a really important one. And I think that we've heard this before. We definitely want to continue to celebrate all different cultures. And we would never want to take something away from that. And so that's where this, again, becomes very convoluted and complex and hard to decide. Because we are aware that many cultures like to celebrate, and food is a very important part of that celebration. So we are aware of that. We will definitely take that to the board and express that side of it as well. So.
This is Margaret. I'd like to just add to that. It is really important, I think, that we start looking at food prepared in homes. The CDC does not recommend that we do that because of cross-contamination. The state of Nevada wellness policy recommends that we not allow food prepared in homes to be brought in unless it's for their specific children. But I do think that we can continue cultural celebrations with each child bringing in their own food and then speaking to that and sharing why their food is important to them. Even the child with diabetes could stand up and say, my food is made with limited sugar. The child with celiac disease could talk to that. So I think we can make this a positive experience for children.
Thank you. The next question, are we doing kids who have food allergies a disservice by being overly stringent and setting up restrictions in the classroom of no shared food when cross-contamination can occur on any surface such as doorknobs, playground equipment? Are we giving students a false sense of security under this draft policy?
Tammy Golden from the Section 504 department. That's a great question. Excuse me, because with an allergy in a classroom, our duty is number one to keep a student safe, but number two to teach students how to advocate for themselves and learn and grow and develop positive ways of keeping themselves safe in a school environment, in a social environment, and within environments outside of the school system. We have libraries, we have playground equipment, cafeterias, doorknobs, absolutely, fountains, where there could be cross-contamination. We try with our policy as best we can, and students who have Section 504 accommodations, to prevent very concerning circumstances and a reaction from an allergen for those students. However, too, we do have a policy to help ensure that students who have a reaction, we know what to do in those situations too. So there's two things going on here. What we're trying to do with the policy is help ensure that, our celebrations are, number one, fun, and safe at the same time. So we're simply trying to prevent an unsafe situation for every student. However, too, we want to help ensure that, we still have have a great place to learn and grow and minimize any kind of influence on curriculum as possible.
We've touched on this a little bit, but if you could elaborate, will food be allowed in classrooms for educational purposes? I do cooking projects often with my class. I integrate math, ELA, and science standards into the lessons, and I'm careful with checking with parents about avoiding foods that may be problematic for my students. How will classes like home ec be affected by this policy?
This is Margaret Allen. We've talked about that, and we've had feedback from various stakeholders. Vicki has a good way of managing that, and the teachers are usually really proactive, especially at the upper grades. Students can self-advocate. We do have some students that may be in a higher grade level. We're still going to have our action plan for them. The nurse is very involved, the teacher's very involved, and the parent has to be involved because then they can make accommodations for those students.
One other quick thing I would add is I don't know how prevalent this is exactly in our district, but I am aware of a few situations where we have teachers actually that are required by their physicians to eat things during class because of a variety of different, symptoms and things like that that may be allergic to some students. And so that's another to this and another piece of it that just adds to the complexity.
Similar, but how will this affect after school activities like harvest festivals where candy is passed out and shared?
We are making our focus the classroom where students really don't have a choice of being. And again, if we're trying to keep the educational playing fields level, it's in the classroom that we are just advocating that there be no food celebrations where food is shared. Every student, there'll be a plan for every student to eat at their desk. Somebody asked earlier about hand washing and a policy for that. We know that children share germs, and when they're sharing food, they're sharing germs. It just makes it safe across the board. And we will have a cleanup procedure, which we do have now for some students where they have to eat, at their desk, and then the desk area is cleaned up. It's contained so that children are not at a celebration where they have the choice of going around to tables and selecting food and possibly cross-contamination.
Why make it a mandate? This question asks, it feels like micromanaging and it frustrates teachers. Why can't individual schools just decide what works best for their school community?
We have heard from some stakeholder groups that they want a policy because they feel it needs to be a policy in order to be carried across the board throughout the district. So we have heard that. I think the nurses, have also heard that from principals. Well, we'd like to see it in the policy so we know what direction to take. Because again, it is controversial.
Here's a comment in support. I just wanted to say thank you for creating a fair policy to help kids with food allergies, diabetes, and other medical conditions to stay safe at school. I understand that change is difficult, but a birthday party with cupcakes is not an essential part of school. I love school parties as a child, and I still do, but they can still be done with games and trinkets without hyping the kids up on sugar or endangering or excluding a child in class. It sounds like a win-win to me. We touched on this a little bit, but we've been getting this question a lot. How many times are EpiPens actually used in our district? How many times a year, perhaps, are they needed for students?
We have some data. It isn't, I think we pulled this data last year, where in 2019, up until probably November, we had given 2 EpiPens. Again, the incidence of students is rising. Students with food allergies is rising. So, we do give the EpiPens. We have designated, and then some kids, we have undesignated for kids that may not carry their own Epi. And so it's the majority of time we're giving epinephrine to students that don't know they have an allergy. They discover it after their first reaction at school.
Great. And another medical related question. Can you explain the difference between allergies and anaphylaxis reaction?
Anaphylaxis is a severe allergic reaction to a foreign substance, whether it's a bee sting or a food or a dye. When it goes into anaphylaxis, you never know that. We have numerous stories. There's research that says anaphylaxis is very unpredictable. The reaction can be mild. It can be rash, hives one day, and the next day it could close a child's airway off. It is very scary when a child loses their airway because subsequently they're going to suffer brain damage. They may not die, but brain damage could occur. And so the anaphylaxis is unpredictable, and you never know when an allergic reaction is going to move towards being an anaphylactic reaction.
All right. This one is interesting. Does this policy address anaphylaxis associated with exposure to domestic animals?
It does not, just like it doesn't address environmental allergies. But again, if we have a child that has that issue, our nurses are going to create an emergency action plan to deal with that.
And we've had this question a couple of times, but I think we have viewers coming in and out. So can you talk a little bit more about how EpiPens are available to students, how that would actually work and be implemented in a classroom?
As a school nurse, when I find out a child has an allergy, whether that's usually through the enrollment, on the online enrollment, but then sometimes it gets missed and I find out another way. But I contact the parent, discuss the allergy, see if the child has their own EpiPen. Most of children with severe allergies have their own EpiPens. And we encourage the parent to set up the personal EpiPen there at school. But we do have undesignated EpiPens at each school. We have an adult dose and a pediatric dose. We do not send those on field trips, though, so we highly encourage children to have their own EpiPen there, whether they carry it in their backpack or we have it there in the health office, and we train everybody on that.
We have 2 doses, is that right, of Epi in every school?
That's correct.
And
yeah.
that was as of, when was that? Do you remember what law that was?
Seems like that's been 3 years that we started that.
Okay.
And then we, like we're saying, we train people there in the office and other people that are, if I'm not there, there's a clinical aide. If she's out, we have other people that are trained how to use those. That's for the undesignated and the children with their own EpiPens.
We are getting questions. Of course, we'll receive the feedback and compile that from this forum and provide that to those that are drafting the policy as well as our Board of Trustees. But if you'd like to just talk a little bit more about the process, if folks want to give more feedback, what would be the best way to do that?
Yeah, I think that they can certainly respond to this forum, right, online still?
Absolutely. Yes.
And if that doesn't work, I'm sure that they can look my email address up or Margaret's, and we would be happy to field any emails. Every day we're pretty much compiling additional feedback so that we are well prepared when we go back to the board, and we can give them. I think we're starting to categorize a lot of the feedback into different kind of themes or categories, so that we can have a pretty detailed presentation to the board.
Great.
Yep.
Excellent. And we've received this question a lot. We have definitely touched on this, but we're getting it again. If you could just explain how we define shared food, or how the draft policy defines that.
Shared food is any food that is brought in and intended to be shared among the class. So it could be a birthday cake, it could be donuts, it could be a potluck type party, so anything that is intended to be shared. And what the CDC recommends is, again, that we educate children in the fact that sharing food is not necessarily healthy, and for a number of reasons. Allergens, cross-contamination, hands that are dirty when they're sharing it. So shared food is anything brought in that is intended to be shared. I would include prepackaged food. That is a question we've asked. When you bring in prepackaged food, and people that have allergies or diabetes or another disease, they learn to read labels, and not every manufacturer of food is willing to have the liability of saying this was prepared in a nut-free environment. And I'm sure Rose could talk to that, because they are constantly struggling with.
Correct. And great comment and question. And for our listeners in the audience, the Nutrition Services Center is a nut-free facility. So we do vet our products, but that is slightly different of Margaret's definition of food prepared in a facility, which may contain nuts. So for folks out there in the audience that read labels, this is probably something familiar with you. I know it's very, very familiar with parents of students with food allergies, food intolerances, or any food preference they may have in their home environment as well. So thank you for that.
Another question we're receiving, do you have people on your panel today who are not in favor of this policy, to make it all-inclusive and representative of the majority that do not have food allergies? If you could just touch on that, please.
I don't know. We haven't actually really talked about that amongst each other. I was the one that, was instrumental in proposing a policy after talking with nurses, but I have nurses that are, really struggle with this. So Victor and I have both tried to be very open-minded. While I am a great proponent of it because of the safety results and my adversity to risk because of my medical training, but I think we have tried to give the board the feedback, the honest feedback. We have sat in meetings where people are very passionate, and we understand that. I was on the fence up until this summer, was not sure what I was going to do with this, but I was very concerned for student safety and the liability for nurses because of their nursing license in not fully providing a protection plan for a student that that may end up having a severe adverse reaction.
Great. We have, oh, did you want to add that?
Good. I just know that from a building principal perspective or a teacher perspective, there's a lot of pressure from families, particularly traditionally on eating food in the classroom and celebrating. And so I know that logistically, I think that I can see value in really both sides, and so I struggle with this, and it's really, really complex and hard. And so I try to remain very open-minded in every presentation that we do, and I want to listen, and I just, the more I listen though, it's more and more and more complex, and so I really think that when we go back to the board, we're not going to be doing them an easy. They're going to still have a very difficult decision to make, because this is, there's great arguments that I see on both sides.
On with that too. Before working in the Section 504 department, I worked in public schools, elementary, middle, and the high school level as a counselor, and I'm willing to say that there are absolutely some very innovative, creative strategies that teachers have used in implementing their curriculum and helping students learn by doing and tasting and introducing food as part of their curriculum to help them. Now you understand, when you see it like this and food is part of it, it's part of, a happy activity and it's fun. But I would have to say that after working in the Section 504 department and working closely with parents of students who have allergies and listening to what the symptoms are like, what the hospital experience was like, emergency situations where they weren't sure if their child would get through it, I have to say that I don't know that anything would be worth risking that type of situation. I have to believe that the students or teachers who are so innovative to come up with those activities involving food could be equally as innovative in coming up with non-food activities and promoting learning in other ways.
We've got about 3 minutes left, so maybe one or two more questions today. This one we've received a few times. Could you please discuss a little more about how this policy would affect classes like Culinary Arts?
That is one of the reasons that we're asking for feedback. Again, it might look different in the elementary school than it would in the high schools. I think it's very dependent on the situation of the student and what kind of accommodations they might have.
Yeah, and again, I'm not sure exactly how many students we have with a known food allergy and a 504 or a healthcare plan that still want to have the opportunity to take a foods class. And that's where, again, it becomes challenging, because we need to give them access to those environments, but yet we also need to protect them. And so I think that any principal or any educator, wants to protect all of their students always. And they also want to give them a great experience while they're at school and allow them, we certainly wouldn't want to exclude a student from a culinary arts class just because they have a food allergy, but I wonder how many parents choose to do that.
And with just about a minute left, we'll probably want to go over what the next steps will be for you with this policy. I understand it's going before the board, the policy committee, and then the full board regular meeting. So if you could just go over that, please.
I would just start off with that answering that question by saying that we still have 4 stakeholder group presentations to go, and that will take us up to about the end of February, and then we will compile all of our feedback at that time and prepare hopefully a very good presentation to the board that we will go back to on March the 3rd. And as Interim Superintendent McNeil pointed out, on March 3rd, that's just the first of several steps for if this does become a policy. So I would imagine that if it continues on and continues being passed on, perhaps sometime in early to mid-April, it might be approved, but that's just a guess, I think. I'm not sure exactly the timeline.
Great. Well, I'd like to thank all of our panel participants tonight, as well as our live audience. This has been very informative, and you can still send in your comments to the questions at washoeschools.net. And again, those will be compiled for review by our policymakers as well as the Board of Trustees. Thank you, and have a good night.